Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Ganganapate Namaha. Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurumedeva Sarvakarishu Sarvada. Om Ganganapate Namaha. Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Deva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Namo Narayanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Shri Hanumanji Maharaj Ki Jai. धर्म की जय हो, अधर्म का नाश हो, प्राणियों में सद्भावना हो, विश्व का कल्याण हो. नमः पार्वती पते हर हर महादेव हर. Welcome to Nitya Satsang. Today is the 14th of October 2025. I want to offer my respects and prostrations to all the great sages, Bhagwan ke Bhakta throughout the world today, as well as the Supreme Paramatma, Parabrahma Ishvara residing in the heart of every single being and at all places, at all times, Ishavasam Idam Sarvam. With that bhavana and prarthana, by the blessings of Bhagwan and great sages, we have the opportunity to examine this extraordinary state of living called Jivan Mukti. And in that state, there is Prema Bhakti. Prema Bhakti, Jivan Mukti go together. And as a connector in terms of developing that Sthiti, that Jivan Mukta Sthiti, as we mentioned yesterday, we're continuing to examine Brahmacharya. So today, I want to move a bit forward, because if I don't move forward, we will not be able to move forward. There's so many amazing ideas in Urdhvareta Naishtik Brahmacharya. There is a book that eventually will be published on that subject in itself, and maybe at some point in the future we can have special sessions for that. We'll see how that goes. But I want to cover another dimension of Brahmacharya based on the Shiva Sutras, or it's called the Vignan Bhairav Tantra. Now let me explain some of the background on this, so what exactly this is all about. And there's a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding and misapplication of these ideas. So imagine for a moment you have an individual, could be any individual, who has desires, right? We're talking about the sexual response cycle particularly. So what do you do in that situation? So there's three possibilities. One is to try to transmute that through a lot of devotional yogic practice. This is one possibility. And that is generally what is recommended, for people who are having very strong, potent vasanas. This is one path. It's difficult, but it is definitely a path. The other path is just a more traditional householder path. There's a certain amount of interaction between male, female, etc. And then person tries to deal with it somehow and goes on in that way. But there's another path, and that is to mix meditation into the sexual response cycle itself. It's like anything else in life, right? Is it possible to mix meditation while you're eating food? Yes. Why not? Obviously, we do it, don't we? Say Hari Naam Lena, Bhagwan Ka Naam Lena, while you're having your meals, while we're walking, while we're performing bodily activity of any kind, mental activity of different kinds. Is it possible to be in a meditative state while being active in terms of the sense enjoyments itself? It's possible. It's difficult, but it's possible. Is it possible to be in a meditative state when one is watching a movie, let's say? Yes, it can happen. But the perspective has to change. I've talked about that before. That, there's an experience, but one is seeing it in a completely different light, in a much higher light. Is it possible to do such things with the sexual response cycle? Yes, definitely it is. And Bhagwan Shankar himself has taught the technique. The technique is in one of the sutras, in one of the actual statements. It's a aphoristic statement, that at the start of sexual union, keep attention to the fire in the beginning, and so continuing, avoid the embers towards the end. This is the technique. This is the entire left-handed technique of Tantra that is utilized specifically in the sexual response cycle for individuals who are trying to infuse meditation in an attempt to try to transmute the vasanas themselves. So there's a lot of terminology for this. I mean, and there's many books published on this actually, and one would need a specialized teacher usually to be able to deal with, to know how to do this so that there aren't problems in the practice. But in simple language, there's one simple way to understand this, that slow the whole thing down. Don't go too fast. Those who are going to engage in that activity, slow down. I'm going to use the example of food. Right? Take the example of food. Let's say you have your favorite meal in front of you, and just compare that to the sexual response cycle, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. That the food that is available with 4 or 5 items and very nicely made is available. The tendency if somebody's very hungry is just to eat very fast and finish it, and just to kind of, okay, I'm satisfied. Get to that satisfaction, saturation point. Same thing happens with the sexual thing, right? That the experience is such that one has so much deep desires, they want to get to the end very quickly, into the resolution stage or into the refractory period of the response cycle, after an orgasm happens, which is a high energy phenomena. The practice in left-handed tantra, Vam Marg Tantra, for those who have intense vasanas, very strong vasanas, is to slow this whole thing down, and to do this with a partner who understands this process. So it is a meditative technique. It is a worthy technique for those who are having potent desires. And it's a technique that can be used probably by most grahastha, most householders can use this technique. Slow it down. More romance in the beginning, more foreplay, things like that. So these are techniques that really slow down the entire phenomena, so that there is more deep breathing, there is more awareness of the way that the energy is moving, things like that. And the enjoyment is there, but the enjoyment is not consuming the individual. These are called tantra practices. All right, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. It doesn't mean just to have lots and lots of sexual pleasure. That's not what it means. It actually means to slowly limit that experience, and so that the amount of enjoyment is actually more with the limited experience of pleasure. You understand? So it's like if you have somebody who has a food addiction, what does a person do if somebody's addicted to food? They don't just keep eating more food. They can have the food, but they have to eat it slowly, and they have to, and you take, literally do mantras and do deep breathing and meditation and all that, and mindfulness to reduce the quantity of the food. Right? This is the basic idea. And does it help? Yes, it can. But the desire is such that you just want to have a large amount of food to get to that saturation point, and the brain is releasing serotonin and some other neurotransmitters, and then the desire is extinguished at that point. You see, so that's what Shivji is teaching there, that to avoid the embers at the end, embers meaning the slow dying fire. That happens in relationships in the sexual response cycle. A person engages in the sexual response cycle, there is an end point, and then now the desire is gone. इच्छा ही निकल गई है. तो इच्छा के साथ इच्छा का क्या करना? What to do with this desire? You see, so one can try to suppress it, and that's not a good idea. Suppression is not going to help. That'll rebound, right? The Bhagavad Gita teaches us karmindriyani samyamya ya aste manasasmaran indriyarthan vimudatma mithyacharah sa uchyate. Somebody who's tried to suppress the desires, but their mind is still active in all those, in that Vishaya Bhog. Bhagavan Krishna Paramatma, he says it clearly. Mithyacharah sa uchyate. It doesn't lead anywhere. You see, so that's not a path. Suppression is not a path. And then those who are just doing bhog mein hi, eat, drink, be married. That's Vishaya Bhog mein. Continue the sexual response cycle. Shakti ka nash kar dena. Again and again and again. That is not a path also. That is damaging. That is not going to help anybody. And that causes a lot of difficulty. So there's a middle ground. The middle path is the actual answer in this. That is transmutation. But those who want to engage in this, process, slow it down, have more romance, do sadhana in the beginning. I mentioned this before for Grahastha Ashram. So similar to what I had talked a little bit about before, but this is specifically about meditation techniques while engaging in the sexual response cycle itself. So at the very beginning, there's changes physiologically and all that. I don't want to describe too much right now in this, but you can understand what I'm talking about. Those changes are there. And in that, slow it down, retract, come back down. Don't go to the end point. Avoid the embers towards the end. At the start of sexual union, keep attention to the fire in the beginning. This is the technique. That one technique is given by Shivji, Shankar Bhagwan, in the Vignan Bhairav Tantra. Or sometimes they're called Shiv Sutras. I think there's 114 of them actually. And there's all kinds of meditation techniques in there. And it's a conversation between Shiva and Shakti. So that's a model for between the male and the female. It's a model for the couple. Very, very important. But what is the actual step-by-step process? I'll lay it out here so it becomes very clear. Right? Now, the first step, the very, very first thing that is needed in this is respect. Respect for your partner. Each, male has to respect the female, etc. They have to decide. Set aside a time where there's no distraction, there's no obstruction, there's maybe good 3-4 hours are set aside to do this. It's a sadhana. It's a kind of sadhana actually. Not kind of, it is a sadhana. It's a very important sadhana in Grahastha Ashram. But it's a good sadhana for those who have strong, potent desires, because otherwise they'll wind up in pornography, they'll wind up in prostitution, they'll wind up in some other thing, and it'll cause problems in the relationship at home. So you don't want that to happen. So you have to set aside good 3-4 hours. And how to do that. So in the very beginning, the best, you can make a very beautiful romantic dinner at home or go outside if you want. It starts with romance. Wear nice clothes. Body should be very clean. Cleanliness of the body. These are actual techniques. And, because I was a therapist for many years, so we actually taught these things to couples. And they're good. And they're good techniques for everybody to do who are engaged in this process, right? So there's a connection that develops. You have nice conversation. Leave aside anger, fear, all that kind of stuff. Leave that aside. Before engaging in the meal, before going outside, literally 15 minutes, Namah Shivaya mantra, Om Namah Shivaya mantra. Grahastha Ashram ke liye, Om Namah Shivaya. Very important mantra. Shiv Ling should be there, or Shiv and Parvati ka vigrah, that should be there. Very important. Extremely. Or Radha Krishna ka vigrah, wo bhi chalega, that's fine. The male female vigrah should be there. That is important. Now with that, after doing this sadhana together with a small diya, and then you go outside for a small meal, nice romantic meal, 1 hour is spent there, whatever good amount of time, and then you come back home, and then in your room where all this sexual activities to happen, it should be very clean. And you have to go into it completely slowly. This is the technique that is taught by Shankar Bhagwan actually. You see, and then go into it slowly. Spend a lot of time in foreplay, things like that, and then eventually you realize that there is a power inside of you that is moving. There's an enjoyment that is called sukha. That is the pleasure current, pleasure potency. But that is within us. In fact, that has its source in the divine. It has only one source. But people mistake that. They just are running after that. Don't do that. Don't run after it. It is available there. Develop the connection of love. That pleasure that, Purush wants the pleasure from the woman wants the pleasure from the man, right? This kind of thing. All right. That eventually transmutes further into love, prema. It goes from the bodily to the emotion, from the emotion into devotion towards God. That is the link. That should be the destination. The destination is prema. Akhanda prem, Bhagwan ka akhanda prem. And if you love that supreme tattva with tremendous love, then the love, that same tattva is present in your husband or wife. Then one is no longer functioning only at the bodily level or at the human emotion level. It is at a much greater level than that. The ideal example of that is Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa. He's evolved being. You see, completely evolved. And this is what we're talking about, that there is such a possibility to reach such a stage. That is the purpose of this particular technique. The purpose is not, as many in the Western countries have taken this thing on, just to increase sexual activity. And that's all. That's just to keep increasing. No. That is not its purpose. If you want to just do that, then that is hedonism. That is not the meaning of the word tantra. Tantra means to integrate, weave together, bind together, connect together. That is what is meant by the word tantra. But people have taken so much negative stuff out of that. That's not, it should not be misunderstood at all in this way, right? So these are some key points to keep in mind. Now look, there's a couple of other things here. This is a very personal phenomena. Anybody trying this has to be very sincere. Usually would need a teacher in terms of how to do it. Or there's books, there's lots of books and everything available. But it's a matter of practice. It's not simply, that one can just do this right away. It doesn't happen right away. It is not easy to do also, because the human mind is obsessed with the sexual response cycle, particularly the male mind. It's obsessed. So it has to completely be put in a meditative, respectful, devotional dimension. That's an amazing thing, right? So actually what you can have, this might sound like a strange thing to try, but it's not. I hope I'm not being too descriptive about this, but this is the way it goes. You have your room where you're going to do this actually, and at the same time actually you would have a shivling, or like a Ardhanareshwar Swarupa Bhagwan Shankar. You can keep that in the room actually, and then place a small diya over there. And so you have to remove from your mind any negativity towards the sexual response cycle. That's another problem, because there's a lot of conflict inside. No, I shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. This is that, because you're with a partner, you have a marriage or whatever the good relationship. There's nothing wrong in the cycle itself, in the response cycle. You see, so you want to actually ask for blessings from the Devi and from Shivji for success in this meditation. It is a meditative and then it goes on, and then it's non-verbal. The whole sexual process is quite, it's not like regular human language, and then it's all experience, and then from there eventually it goes back into meditation. So then you leave the physical aside, put on some light clothes and sit for meditation again. And these are difficult techniques. People have tried to do this in groups, and like in terms of gurus have tried to teach this, but most people are not successful in this. They have misunderstood it. They don't know how to do it. And not only that, some misunderstanding can happen out of it. And the goal of it is not to drown in the sexual pleasures. Understand? It is not to drown in that. It is to be afloated in that. It's like a swimming pool. I'll give you a simple example. If you have a lake or a big lake, right? If you go into the lake, the purpose of swimming in the lake is not to drown in the lake. The purpose is to swim afloat on the lake and or cross to the other side. If you have a river, let's use a river as an example. You're crossing the river from one bank to another, and you're going to swim. And it's something that you can swim. The goal is not to drown inside that river. The goal is to swim and successfully get to the other side of the river. This is why Bhagwan Shankar taught this technique. That yes, he knows, because he was a yogi, he's an incarnation of God, Bhagwan Hiswayam. He knows everything, right? So he knows that the Jivatma needs some way to cross this river of these desires. Some way is necessary. And this is the technique he has shown. That slow this down. Engage for 5 minutes, 10 minutes in the more physical level contact, and then sit separately. So, literally have meditation mats on the floor or on chairs. Get out of the bed, literally put on some light clothes, And literally, this is how it is done. This is how the keep a small diya, have a murti, have a shivling or Ardhanareshwar Swarup. One of those two you should have. That should be the central focus. The special room needs to be created to do this. Kisi ko malum nahi all this thing. People say Ardhanareshwar Swarup kya hai? This is Ardhanareshwar Swarup. What is Ardhanareshwar Swarup? One of the meanings of the shivling is this. It's not the only meaning. There's another higher meaning. Many other higher meanings are there. But this is one of the meanings. You see, and the Ardhanareshwar form itself, very important. That is exactly the whole point. It's the fusion inside. So then what happens here? You sit for meditation. Again, Namah Shivaya mantra, Klim Bij mantra. This is a love mantra. Prem ka mantra, very important. So again, if that is chanted together, that will enhance the connection. It's amazing what will happen in this apka. Those who want to try it, you can try in your lives, and see what happens in this. So you do the dhyan like this, and for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then again go back. As long as the human male does not go towards ejaculation and does not lose the Shakti from inside, you can continue this process for extended period of time. And the more it is extended, the better off it is going to be in terms of transmutation. It is a way to transmute out of desire by infusing more meditation and less emphasis on the stimulation itself. I hope this is clear. If you have questions, you can ask me. I'll be happy to talk about it. As I told you, we did a lot of research on this for many years. Very, very important, and very important as a therapeutic technique for in counseling and psychology and all that, because we were trained in all these things, obviously. But whatever it may be, it has to be done in the right way. With regards to assisting individuals who may be going through this kind of shit. So those are professional therapists. I'm not doing that anymore. We used to have a big counseling program and all that. But the techniques are still valid, right? They're absolutely valid. And then come back again through this process. Eventually, it's kind of a strange thing. It's where the man can kind of just stay away from that. It's called the point of no return. Stay away from that, and then can get back into meditation. It's a meditation stimulation cycle, essentially. This goes back the thousands of years. There were many kings in the past, in the Sanatan Dharma, who were trained in how to do this. It's a very intense process. But at the same time, the goal of it is to be very, very mindful. That because what will happen in the beginning stages or even later on, the attraction towards, with each other will increase a lot. That's why this is a left-handed path. It's a different path compared to the right-handed path. The right-handed path is called Dakshin Marg. This is Vam Marg path. And it is for those individuals who want to try that, who have a lot of desires, Ichha bahut prabal, like strong desires for them, then this kind of path is available. You see, so there is a path, but the goal of that path is to eventually stabilize these vasanas, to do much more dhyan, and eventually getting some experience of what the sexual process is like, and then eventually shifting back into right-handed path. Now, I'll give you an example of cigarette smoking. Can this be done with cigarette smoking? Yes, exactly. Somebody who is smoking, let's say, 2 packs of cigarettes a day. What do? You tell them, oh, to stop smoking. They say, I cannot stop. So what do? Common sense would say, start reducing it. Common sense, isn't that so? Common sense would say, reduce it. Reduce the number of cigarettes you're smoking. Okay, fine. That's fine. But there's a meditative way to smoke the cigarette, because you're going to smoke it anyway, right? So before smoking the cigarette, place it, on a small table and do meditation. Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya. I actually taught this practice to one Christian lady many years back. She was like 75 years old, you see, and She was addicted to cigarette smoking. But she was also devoted to Jesus, to the Bible and all. So what I said to her, I said, I want you to make a candle, place a candle, make a nice clean area on a table, put a small white cloth or some good colored cloth there, put the Bible on the left side, and next to the Bible, put your pack of cigarettes there. Not on the Bible, next to the Bible. And you sit and take deep breaths. And you ask God which one you want. You ask God for blessings. You don't have to even open the Bible. Just keep the Bible there and keep the cigarettes on the right side. And she did that. And when she did that, she had the impulse to smoke, but then she said, no, let me read the Bible instead. Let me do something with the Bible. So eventually then she did smoke a little bit, but it reduced a lot. She just did this practice 3 times a day. So she did smoke, but the reduction happened considerably. Because the goal is to get rid of the cigarette smoking completely. The goal in Grahastha Ashram is to transmute these vasanas into pure bhakti. But that's not going to happen just like that. You have to be able to infuse meditation carefully, slowly, and then go back and forth into it, and then eventually sit for dhyan. Sit for a lot of meditation, lots of dhyan. These techniques were practiced in ancient India also. They were developed in ancient India. They were developed a lot in there, but a lot of misunderstanding happened. A lot of abuse happened because they abused these techniques. You cannot abuse these techniques. These techniques are very, very powerful. And particularly with certain mantras and all that, then it really infuses a lot of positivity. When I was doing clinical practice, we had so many clients, in fact, with all these kinds of problems and all that. So we would infuse certain mantra, so their family life will become better, their divorces would stop, and all that kind of stuff would happen. And at the same time, they would do meditative practices. They would go to their churches, or they would go wherever they would go and do their practices like that, right? So this is very, very powerful. We were going to do a lot of research on this in terms of the addictions problem itself. But some difficulties had happened because of some patient and all that. Well, it's a different story altogether. Even with that issue that happened, I'll give you a very interesting example. It was a very distraught patient, who was 10 times hospitalized, 10 medicines, and so much problem, so much trouble. What can you do, right? And a lot of suicide attempts, could not get out. The mantras really helped a lot. It reduced all of that thing. But then there was some difficulty happened with that situation. One has to be careful. You see, so I made a lot of modifications after that, at that point, because that person became, she just got completely absorbed. She became like deeply attached to me personally, and that became an issue. You see, so then we had to close the case, and it became a lot of trouble actually that happened. But jo bhi hai, Bhagwan ki ichha, we leave that aside. The point is, one has to be careful doing this kind of practice. One has to have a teacher generally, because if you don't know what you're doing in this, what can happen is that you can just wind up mistaking that pleasure as the goal. And that is not the goal. That is not the goal. It is to reduce the amount of the experience, like the cigarette example. Reduce the experience, not to reject the experience, but to reduce the experience. I hope this is clear. And actually, as I was telling you, when we were doing research on this, very interesting. People with food addiction problems used to come, because I used to be an addiction specialist also. All kinds of issues were with food, with sexuality, with cigarettes, with the illicit drugs. Illicit drugs that's a whole different ballgame. I mean, that thing, you have to pretty much stop that. You can't use these techniques with that. It doesn't work usually with them. So that is an abstinence program. Even with gambling addiction, it is like that too. So all of these are in the same category. And once you get into that, it's a lot of trouble. There's something called limited amount, like controlled drinking, the controlled alcohol. It's called harm reduction approach. Can you do it? Maybe some people can. Maybe it's an intermediate step to try. If you have a serious addiction, this happens with the sexuality. Some people are addicted to the sexual phenomena, sexual process. It's an addiction. Now, sex addiction didn't make it into the DSM-5 technical volume, but it probably will at some point. There are some reasons behind that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does exist. Definitely. One of the great researchers who talked about this is Patrick Carnes, Out of the Shadows. It's a very important book, and he did a lot of research on this, and it's actually, in more serious cases, it's a pretty serious illness actually. It's an illness. I remember years back I had a patient who was involved with some 15 different women. Abhi iska kya meaning hai? He was married, had kids and all that, but he was addicted. He was ill. It's a sickness actually. And so rather than blaming anybody, you have to understand the situation and how to come out of this. And these are techniques. So this is the left-handed. It's called Vam Marg Tantra. That is what it is called. There's a lot of other things involved in that also, but I'm just talking only about the sexual process right now. And this is a very straightforward way to do this. And then eventually what will happen, because sadhana increases, the husband, wife, the partners, they can sit together, sit on meditation mats, Bhagwan ki bhakti mein lag jao. That is the real goal. The goal is not to drown in that river. You're crossing the river. So the Grahastha ashram, the sexual response cycle, people who are engaged in the sexual response cycle are trying to cross the river. But remember the problems that are there in today's world, right? Pornography. Huge issue. Once you start watching that, getting into that kind of stimulation, your brain is hijacked by it. It's extremely difficult. Then it becomes even that much more hard. It's better not to get into that, because once a person gets his brain is hijacked by that thing, and there are millions of people watching pornography, millions secretly they're doing it. However they're doing it, it's available for free, and as a result of that, the relationships are damaged. You see, so one has to figure this thing out. How to do, because it doesn't work. It doesn't just go away. It has to be transmuted. See, that understanding has to come that I want to go towards Bhagwan. Bhagwan ka sakshatkar karna hai. Is vasnaon mein, I don't want to be lost inside this, and that's what will happen. It's a jungle, right? So we don't want to be lost in that. And it's a $1 billion industry. You know that. Everybody knows that. This pornography and the sex industry and all that thing. It's a $1 billion industry. But Brahmacharya ka mahima, kitni sundar baat hai. Ardhanareshwar Swarup is about Brahmacharya actually. But it's a different approach only. It's an approach through the experience rather than around the experience or bypassing the experience. There are many approaches. Shakti is only one. एक ही शक्ति है हमारे में, इसका क्या करना है? That's the way it goes, Now, Vivekananda Swami also explained, I mentioned it yesterday, that the same energy can produce children, the same energy can produce creativity, and it can do seva, it can do other things. Yes, producing children is beautiful. So how did we come from? We came from somebody having sex, isn't it so? Our parents? Is that a sin or is it evil or just? No, it's not a sin. Ridiculous. Why is it a sin? How can our life be a sin? But what is the actual, what we say papam, that is overstimulation, too much stimulation just for the sake of pleasure, and that's the only thing that is in the person's mind, and as a result of that, then they drown. Then is drowning in the river. There's a deep river. The river is to be crossed. So you're trying to swim the river using these techniques. This is called the Tantra path. If you get into a boat and cross the river, that is the right-handed path. Bhagwan ke sharan mein aa jaiye and ask God, aham tesham aham samudharta, mrityu sansara sagarat. Bhagwan Krishna kehte. You come to me directly. Don't worry. All this thing. This is for people who cannot come to the Lord, cannot come to Bhagwan, have vasana. So you try this, then eventually you'll come there. Hopefully you'll come there. The couple will eventually be ready to come over there. But this is the way it goes, right? So eventually there is a point where the bodily activity can just remain as a bodily activity. There are householders like that, like Parvat Bhai I was telling you about. I'll talk about that in more detail tomorrow perhaps. He was a householder. He was a householder farmer, a great devotee of Bhakta of Maharaj, of Shriji Maharaj, Swaminarayan Bhagwan. A great devotee. But had 9 children. But he was, unki sthiti thi, Brahmi sthiti, this Jivan Mukta sthiti we talk. He was in that sthiti. But he had, every year every year and a half, he would have a child. So he was obviously engaged in the sexual response cycle. But he was beyond it also. He was not engaged in vasana. That was just happening as a physical activity. Abhi farak, how is that possible? It is. If someone is very evolved internally in spirituality, in bhakti, then that is a path where the physical activity, like any other activity, you're moving your hands, you're urinating, defecating, whatever. I mean, there's fluids coming out of the body. There's the activity of the physical body. Just like that, there's a physical activity that is done. Just as but there's no mind that is involved in terms of vasana. हाँ, ये ऐसी भी एक स्थिति है. ये एक अलग interesting बात है. Like how in the world is that possible? I don't think people, nobody wants to talk about these things. They may not know how to talk about perhaps. But there is such a sthiti. ऐसी भी एक स्थिति है. ऐसे भी भक्त हो गए. Janak Raja is an example. In fact, there's a Vachanamrut, Vartal number 20, that talks about this. And ऐसी जो स्थिति है, it is even greater than Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And that's the most interesting phenomena. How can this sthiti be greater than Nirvikalpa Samadhi? Because in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, there is just you're experiencing Brahman, the mind is concentrated in God. That's it. But then when you come out of that, again the desires, vasanas can possibly come about. So Shriji Maharaj, Swaminarayan Bhagwan, Maharaj बहुत सुंदर बात करते हैं in Vartal number 20 Vachanamrut. आपको मैं बताऊंगा. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow. Just one thing leads to another. It's so beautiful. And Maharaj, there's a very interesting conversation he had with his big saints. And none of them could resolve this issue regarding Nirvikalpa Samadhi में से बाहर निकलते हैं. There are still some vasanas that come about. So Maharaj gave, no, you can stay in the sansar. Like Janak Raja, who has mastered Sankhya and Yoga. And that is the real goal here of the Ardhanarishwar Swarup also, is to master Sankhya and Yoga. We don't have time today to go into that, but maybe we'll cover that tomorrow. It's very interesting. And when you master that, Sharirik Kriya chalti hai. It is not the path of Urdhvareta Brahmacharya, but it is a type of Brahmacharya, but a different kind of Brahmacharya. Where physical activity continues, mind and vasanas are not involved. Mind is involved only to the extent that there is a physical activity, but there is no ahankar or any damage to the connection with Paramatma. Is possible? Is that, why not? If you can drink a cup of coffee and say Ram, 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 and have all kinds of, go for a walk or take a shower and take a bath and do all daily activities and include Bhagwan inside there. Has anybody tried to do that? Tried to include Bhagwan into the sexual response cycle? Kisi ke mind, actually what we do, because of our, we meaning human beings, because of our ego and vasanas, we push God away. If we are doing sadhana, I said, no, Bhagwan, you stay in your temple, you don't come over here. ऐसी सब बात होती. But it's not. But those who are very evolved, like Jivan Mukta Sthiti, that their connection with the divine, with the divinity, is never lost. Is not, even while they're engaging in these activities. Iska loss hota hi nahi. And that Parvat Bhai is a great, if you go to any Swaminarayan temple, everybody knows about Parvat Bhai. Everybody meaning all the devotees and saints. Ask sometime. They probably have not discussed this subject this way. Very interesting. How did he have 9 children? I, in fact, had a long conversation with one of the saints many years back. How is it that he had 9 children on one hand, and then on the other hand, there's so much emphasis on Brahmacharya, and it all seems very confusing. But it's not. Not if we understand that there is a certain physical process that can go on. And if it's only at that level, there's no big issue. But the moment it becomes vasanas, that seeking pleasure, pleasure seeking, going after, this is where the ojas power is really damaged. Then one is seeking more pleasure because pleasure uses a lot of energy. Yeah, there is some experience of pleasure even in the normal activity like Parvat Bhai or whoever. But even in that, he is connected with Bhagavan. So that experience is just a physical experience. It is not any kind of a mind-laden, vasana-laden, pleasure-seeking experience. And this is the goal. This goal is there of this left-handed tantra practice, to eventually get to that point. And then from there, if you want to move into Urdhvareta Brahmacharya, आप उसमें भी जा सकते. Yes, possibly. Possibly that probably happened in his life. At some point he said, okay, bought some children, ho gaye, all this thing is there. His connection is divine. There's no more need to do anything like this. It just continues. Or maybe even if he continued, it was only simply because of the physical activity. He's a farmer doing a lot of physical activity, the physiology of the body, things like that. But Urdhvareta Brahmacharya ka path alag path hai. I mentioned it yesterday. And Swaminarayan ke jo sant hai, they are trying to follow that. Vivekananda Swami mastered that. So that's a different approach completely. One can be single and try to follow that too, and actually get established in that. Adbhut marg hai wo. But aur isme kya hota hai? There is the possibility of going into different lokas and different samadhi states because of Urdhvareta Naishtik Brahmacharya, because the powers of the indriyas, of the mind and things like that, they develop more. Shukdev ji was like that. He was a Urdhvareta Naishtik Brahmacharya. So Maharaj has given this example, this clarification in Garada Madhya number 20 Vachanamrut. So those kinds of extraordinary powers, yogic powers, they develop in the Urdhvareta path. They may not develop in the other path, but the realization of Bhagavan and Bhakti is the Jivan Mukta Sthiti. Wo to same hi hai. There's a little bit of a difference in terms of some of these certain kinds of siddhis and powers and things like that. Thoda farak usme hota hai, but that's not of any real big consequence, right? So this is how this works. This is a difficult subject to talk about. I wanted to try to cover this, as clearly as possible, as properly as possible. It's very, very tricky. It's very personalized. People don't want to talk about it. And you shouldn't be talking about it just with anybody. It needs to be understood as to what's really happening in life. Iska respect hona chahiye. Ye Shakti ka sab game hai. It's a game of Shakti. Which way you want it to go in life, that's the whole point. And there is no doubt that the human body, it is a microcosmic universe. It's an amazing phenomena we have been given by Bhagavan. And we can do amazing things with it once we know how to utilize it for its highest purpose. Wow. Bahut sundar. Vati sundar. Brahmacharya jaisa kuch nahi hai. If kids are taught from childhood, yes, you can enjoy your life, enjoy everything. Bhagwan ki bhakti karo. Brahmacharya should be clear what it is from teenage onwards. Open discussions about this, forums about this need to be held. Conversations need to be held. This is just, Sachin is just trying to present it here, but would like to hold maybe online, or maybe we'll do it at my place here sometime. To have conversations with some of the younger generation about these things, about newly married couples, about how to engage in this, what to do in this. So I have a lot of research on this, a lot of ways to think about it, and I want to hold some special seminars on this subject, definitely in the future at some point. So it's a remarkable journey. बहुत सुंदर बात है. Please be careful. इतनी ही प्रार्थना है. इसका abuse नहीं करना. Whether it's a left-handed path, right-handed path, don't abuse Shakti. Don't. And the main thing is never to disrespect another partner. To disrespect anybody. To disrespect anyone is a very, very, very serious problem, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen. Just be very, very clear that life is extraordinarily precious. Just before we close today, I just want to mention this, that ये जो जीवन, हमारा जो जीवन कहाँ से आया, where did it come from? It came from God ultimately. It also came from our parents. It also came from our parents. And it is very, very important that we do not disrespect anyone in the family, because by doing so, it is going to cause a lot of crazy stuff, and we don't want that to happen, right? So with that, I wish you all really well, a lot of success in this. If anybody has any real questions about this, please do ask about it. I do want to hold some specialized seminars on this, which will cover an academic aspect, a practical aspect, some open, good conversations in small groups on this. We probably do it personally here, maybe do it online, but it's probably better to do it personally. I have books published on this stuff actually, and on this subject of Brahmacharya. बहुत ही सुंदर बात है. So on that basis, we'll continue tomorrow. We'll close here because I have an appointment to go to, so we won't do the Q&A right now. I'll just do the closing mantra and then we'll continue tomorrow. Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakarishu Sarvada Om Ganganapate Namaha Om Shri Sadgurubhyo Namaha Om Aim Rim Klim Chamundai Viche Sarva Mangal Mangalde Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharanitrambe Devi Narayani Namosute Om Shri Sadgurubhyo Namaha Om Shri Radha Krishnaya Namo Namaha.